back to the show. This is The Law Show on CL 650.
Help, I need somebody. Help, not just anybody. Help, you know I need someone. Help.
Hey, and welcome to The Law Show on CL 650. Our guest today, Joe Murphy, QC from Murphy-Battista in Vancouver. And we're talking about distracted driving, pedestrians. And before we get into host liability, which is important at this time of year with people hosting through the holidays, what have you seen in your practice in terms of cyclists? Because I have an issue, I have had this happen to me, where a cyclist hit my car, and there was no personal injury, but someone hit my car, and it cost me, it was $1,200 to fix it, right? And they just got on their bike and rode away, right? So what do you see? I mean, the cyclists don't have insurance. They,
well, they actually do have insurance. If they've got a homeowner or rental policy, they do have insurance. The Motor Vehicle Act, Zach, is interesting because it says when you're getting out of a car on the driver's side, parked on the side of a street, you've got to make sure it's safe to open your door before you do that. Because you've got cyclists who are going down the road. The traffic wants them to pull over to the right so they're not taking up the lane. But if they do that and someone suddenly opens a door in front of them, you can have a terrible collision and terrible injuries. So it's a dilemma. But yeah, you can get cyclists who run into cars and then they take off. There's not much you can do about that. And I believe the city of Vancouver requires licenses on bikes. I know the bike couriers downtown.
Yeah, not for regular cyclists.
Yeah, have a license and it's on the back of the bike. The reality is it's just like a vandalism claim where you have to pay your deductible. It's a comprehensive claim.
That's exactly what happened. So I was out of pocket $500.
Yeah.
And so to get it fixed. All right. Enough. I just want to get some clarification on that. All right. So now we want to talk about host liability. Now you have, it's holiday season, people coming over. You're going to have some drinks. You're going to have a dinner party, people leaving late, 1, 2 in the morning maybe, and they've been drinking all night. What do you have to ensure as the host?
Well, Zach, there isn't a case in Canada that's found the host of a private party at someone's home liable for something bad that's happened to either a person at the party or someone else. But the courts have said that may happen. So if I'm hosting a party at my house, I want to make sure that nobody gets so drunk that they can't get safely home. If I have a friend who's totally drunk and I know he's going to drive home, what should I do? Morally, I should say, listen, let me call you a cab, give me your keys.
I've had that situation, though. People have been at my house and I've said, you're not driving. Let's call you a cab. Oh, no, I'm fine. And you argue with them. But at the end of at least you've had the conversation, right?
Well, some people have a reality that the more they drink, the more unreasonable they get in terms of admitting they've been drinking and shouldn't drive. I think if you come to my house and you have 2 or 3 glasses of wine and then you say, I've got enough, I'm driving, and I cajole you, I really, really put the pressure on you to have more, I think I would be liable if something bad happened to you or someone else. You ran into someone on your way home. I think there is a responsibility there if you, as the homeowner, the host of the party, contributed to creating the problem and the danger. But the courts haven't actually found a case where that's been the basis of responsibility on the homeowner. If you go to some sort of event, then the people who put on the event are liable.
I was going to say, so someone may be listening to this now and they're going to an office Christmas party and they're having it at a hotel ballroom or a pub or something like that. So should the business owner, say it's the CL Christmas party, for example, and you go and people have too much to drink and they get into an accident on the way home. So what's the liability there? Should the person hosting the party have some kind of insurance for that?
Oh, for sure.
And and what is that?
If a company has a commercial liability policy, and most of them do, they should check and see whether that's covered, and if not, they should get it added on. There is a responsibility when you have a party. Christmas parties are a great example because most people go to a Christmas party, it's at the end of the year, and they drink more than they would otherwise. So you really have one night when things are potentially more dangerous than others. My office just had our Christmas party on Friday, and we say to our staff, regardless of where they live, here's taxi voucher. Take the taxi home, regardless of where you live. And that reduces the risk, but there's still some people, as I say, the more they drink, the more determined they are that they're okay to drive. The changes in the law the BC government brought in saying if you're at 0.05 or more, we're not going to charge you with impaired driving, but we're going to seize your car for a month, and we're going to take your driver's license away for 3 months, has had an impact because people are thinking, well, gee, it's only 2 or 3 drinks that gets me there. I've got to be extra careful. I'm going to leave my car at home. And that's the safest way to do it. If you leave your car at home and you walk or you take a cab or take a bus or whatever, the chance of something happening goes way, way, way down.
Now, I've always wondered, is it a defense that you've had so much to drink and that you're impaired to make a rational decision? Because I've always wondered, if somebody gets in their car and drives and hits somebody, for example, but they're just falling down drunk, right? And is it a defense that you've had so much to drink that you couldn't possibly make that decision?
Well, yes, but as you were having so much to drink, you were making the decision
to keep drinking.
If I set out to get drunk, when I get totally drunk, I'm not really aware of what I'm doing. But in the process of having drink after drink after drink, I know what I'm doing. It's interesting. They had a case several years ago of a company that was setting up a display at a big trade show. And once they got the display set up, they had several cases of beer that they fed to everyone who helped set this thing up. And a young fellow had a number of beer. He then went to a bar and had more drinks, and then there was a terrible accident on the way home. And the court in that case found him at fault, but they also found the first employer, the employer who had the drinks after setting up, they were liable because they started this whole sequence of events.
But it's so different from person to person because you get a 300-pound, former football player, and he has 3 or 4 beers versus the 98-pound woman. It's a very different situation. So your ability to control who's drinking what, maybe the 300-pound former football player drinks every night, so he's kind of used to it. Versus the 100-pound girl has a drink once every 6 months. Yeah,
anyone who works in a bar or restaurant in BC has to have the Serving It Right certificate, and that teaches them. How much they learn of it, I don't know, but it teaches them what a reasonable number of drinks are for a person. And the reality is people are sometimes in a bar or restaurant and they're cut off.
I've never seen that, by the way.
The reality is it rarely happens because the more they're served, the more money they spend, the more the bar makes, and the more tips the bartender or waitress makes. So it's quite rare. And my office has acted in a number of what we call pub cases where a pub serves someone to the point where they're staggering out the door and there's a terrible accident. And we go back to the pub and say, look what you created. Again, the Serving It Right certificate said these people should have been cut off far sooner. And in those cases, we sometimes send an investigator into the bar to sit there and watch. And what they sometimes report is, listen, I just watched all the people around me get totally drunk, and nobody was getting cut off. No one was being told, well, we're not going to serve you anymore. So in theory, that's supposed to happen. In reality, it doesn't often happen.
All right, so back to the home hosting. You're having people over for, drinks through the holidays, and it goes late. You've had lots of wine and beer and what have you. What protection does the homeowner have against somebody going out and doing something silly?
Well, you have the protection of your homeowner's insurance policy, and if you're renting a house rather than own it, you have your renter's policy, and that covers a liability claim that would be made. So there is insurance coverage for that. As the host, all you can do is keep an eye on people and try and convince them not to drink. But again, I believe if it's the host providing the drinks and encouraging and cajoling this person, have another, then I think there's the basis of them being partially responsible if something bad happens.
The good news is all of our parties at our house, everybody is in the neighborhood and they walk.
Yes, walking home is pretty safe.
Sometimes it's 4 blocks, but it can take 6, depending on how straight you walk.
Yeah, no, that's the advantage of walking home.
And with hosting people in your home, should you as the host say, "Hey, I'm going to provide taxis home"? Do you need to do that, or is it just like, for example, if you send an email out to everybody or an invite, those electronic invites you get now, and you say, "Hey, having a Christmas party, everybody's come, have a good time. We're going to raise some cheer, and by the way, everybody's, if you want, is provided a taxi." So is that now off your plate if you've offered it at the beginning? You think? Possibly?
Maybe. It's going to reduce your responsibility. But then what it says to me is, these people are going to get very, very, very drunk. You're almost encouraging them. What happens if they take a taxi home and after that something bad happens? I don't know. But again, the courts in Canada haven't found the private party host liable in these situations. It's always been liability on a pub or a restaurant.
It's funny because we've heard this over and over in the media that if you're hosting somebody, you have to make sure, take their keys away, get them a cab. But you're telling me all of that we've heard for the last 20 years, nobody's actually being convicted of it.
No one's been found liable in a civil court for something bad that happens. And oftentimes it's the liability, the 100% liability is divided among a number of defendants. The pub, the server, someone driving a car, that kind of thing.
And is there ever an argument about the insurance company paying? Do they ever say no? Well, or how are they? Or if you have liability insurance, you're covered.
The good thing, Zach, with ICBC, and I'm a great fan of ICBC. Not that we get along all the time, but it's a far better system that we have today with ICBC as the one insurer than if we were in private insurance province. ICBC's policy is this: even though a motorist getting drunk breaches their policy and loses their coverage, ICBC says we're going to pay out on the claim to this person who is injured, and then we're going to turn back to the drunk and say, you owe us $200,000. So they don't penalize the victim injured. They go back later after paying out the claim and say to the drunk, it's $200,000 you owe us. And there's a lot of debts that ICBC has like that. If you go in to renew your driver's license or renew your car insurance, the agent will go and check and see if you're on this debtors list. And if you are, you can't renew.
I think there's a loophole, though, because I was at a auto plan store one time getting insurance, and the fellow was in there getting the temporary insurance, the sticker you put on the back window. Yep. And everybody knew him. They would say, "Hey, Joe, what's?" And when he left, I said, how come everybody knows him? They said, well, he can't get insurance, but he can buy these temporary stickers.
That's a very expensive way to insure.
Very expensive way.
Very expensive.
But if for those times you really need it, I said, wow, that's quite interesting. Yeah, they said they can't get insurance. So this is the way he does it. Interesting.
He's probably paying 8 times what he would normally pay.
But somebody who shouldn't be driving should be paying 8 times more, you would think, right?
Yeah, I know.
Now, speaking of ICBC, when we come back, we have our guest, Joe Murphy from MurphyBattista in downtown Vancouver. We're going to talk about ICBC and rate increases and because we've been talking about this for months about how the ICBC seem to be priming the pump, getting us all ready for rate increases, and here it comes. Next on The Law Show on CL 650.
There's more of the show still ahead. This is The Law Show on CL 650.